The Israelites had a firm understanding of God's strength, protection, and plan for them by the time they left Egypt. They possessed persuasive evidence that they served the true and living God for those willing to believe. Unfortunately, many people continue to reject God, which resulted in additional difficulties and lessons. The Egyptians and other ancient peoples in the region feared the God of Israel as a result. Praise the Lord, dear one, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Esther Henga. I share faith-based content and all things lifestyle. I trust the Lord has kept you since the last time that we were together, and by His grace He has preserved you and given you opportunity to once again come and listen and be inspired by our next natural hairstyle, even as we continue the consistent Bible reading and scriptural meditation by the grace of God. And today we are looking at the 10 plagues of Egypt. Now, what was the significance and aim of Egypt's 10 plagues? Exodus 7-12 describes the 10 plagues of Egypt. The plagues were 10 disasters delivered by God to Egypt to persuade Pharaoh to release the Israelite slaves from the bondage and persecution they had undergone in Egypt for 400 years. When God sent Moses to liberate the children of Israel from slavery in Egypt, He promised to demonstrate His wonders as proof of Moses' power. Exodus 3:20. This confirmation was to serve at least two purposes: to demonstrate to the Israelites that the God of their fathers was alive and worthy of their worship, as captured in Exodus 6 verse 6-8 and 12:25-27, and to show the Egyptians that their gods were nothing, as captured in Exodus chapter 7 verse 5 and 12 verse 12, and also in Numbers chapter 33 verse 4. The Israelites had been captives in Egypt for approximately 400 years and had lost trust in the God of their fathers throughout that time. They believed in Him and worshipped Him, but they were skeptical that He could or would break the burden of their servitude. The Egyptians, like many other pagan societies, worshipped a wide range of nature gods and attributed to their powers natural events they observed in their surroundings. There was a god of the sun, the river, the childbirth, harvest, and so on. The annual flooding of the Nile, which now reached their crops, was proof of their god's power and goodwill. When Moses approached Pharaoh and demanded that he release the people, Pharaoh replied, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey His voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go," as in Exodus 5 verse 12. Thus began the challenge to show whose God was more powerful. The first plague was the plague of the blood. Millions of fish died in the river, rendering the water unfit for human consumption. Pharaoh was assured, "By this you will know that I am the Lord." Exodus 7 verse 17. The second plague brought frogs from the Nile. Frogs were regarded to be sacred and should not be killed. When the frogs died, their filthy bodies were heaped up in fall piles all over the land. Exodus 8:13-14. Gnats were the third plague. The magicians were unable to recreate this affliction, and Pharaoh said, "This is the finger of God." Exodus 8:19. The fourth plague were flies. God clearly distinguished between the Israelites and the Egyptians in this plague, since no swarms of flies plagued the Israelites' homes. Exodus 8:21-24. The fifth plague was the killing of livestock. As with the previous plague, God protected His people. While the Egyptian cattle died, God was gradually undermining Egypt's economy while demonstrating His power to protect and provide for those who obeyed Him. Pharaoh even sent investigators in Exodus 9 verse 7 to see if the Israelites were suffering with the Egyptians, but the result was a hardening of his heart toward the Israelites. The sixth plague were boils. This time, the Bible reports that the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils. Clearly, these religious authorities were impotent against the God of Israel. Pharaoh received a special communication from God prior to the final three plagues. These plagues would be more severe than the others, and they were intended to persuade Pharaoh and all the people that there is none like me in all the earth, as in Exodus 9:14. Pharaoh was even told that he was placed in his position by God so that God could demonstrate His power and broadcast His name throughout the globe. Exodus 9:16. As a sign of His grace, God warned Pharaoh to gather whatever cattle and crops survived from the previous plagues and shelter them from the approaching storm. Some of Pharaoh's servants heard the warning, as in Exodus 9:20, while others did not. Hail, the seventh plague. This hail was unlike any other. It was accompanied by a fire that ran along the ground, and anything left out in the open was destroyed by the hail and fire. Again, the children of Israel were miraculously saved, and no hail damaged anything in their territories. Before the next plague, God told Moses that the Israelites would be able to tell their offspring about what they saw God do in Egypt and how it demonstrated God's strength. The eighth plague were locusts. Wheat and rye, which had escaped the hail, were now destroyed by locust swarms. That year there will be no harvest in Egypt. The ninth plague was darkness. For 3 days, the land of Egypt was engulfed in darkness, yet the Israelites' houses were illuminated. The 10th and final plague was the death of firstborn boys. God was teaching the Israelites a profound spiritual lesson that pointed to Christ through his scourge. Unlike the previous plagues which the Israelites were able to endure because of their identification as God's people, this plague required them to do an act of faith. God instructed each family to slaughter a spotless male lamb. The lamb's blood was to be splattered across the top and sides of their doorways, and the lamb will be roasted and consumed that night. The final scourge will befall any household that did not heed God's instructions. God detailed how he will send the destroyer through Egypt with orders to kill firstborn male in every household, human or animal. The only defense was the lamb's blood on the door. When the destroyer saw the blood, he passed over that home and left it alone. Exodus 12:23. This is where the term Passover derives. Passover commemorates that night in ancient Egypt when God rescued his people from servitude. According to 1 Corinthians 5:7, when Jesus died to free us from the bonds of sin, he became our Passover. While the Israelites found protection from God in their houses, every other home in Egypt suffered God's vengeance as their loved ones died. This heinous act compelled Pharaoh to eventually liberate the Israelites. Pharaoh hardened his heart again after the 10th plague and dispatched his chariots after the Israelites. When God parted the Red Sea for the Israelites and drowned all of Pharaoh's army, Egypt's authority was broken and God's dread spread over the neighboring nations, as in Joshua 2 verse 9 to 11. This was God's stated aim from the beginning. These occurrences can still be used to strengthen our trust in and dread of this true and living God, the judge of all the earth.